Today, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite Magic formats, the cube.
To keep up to date with everything at Knights at the Game Table, all you have to do is click subscribe and then hit that tiny little notification button next to it, so every time we upload a new video, YouTube will be sure to let you know.
Cube is such a great format because it combines a lot of people's favorite elements from both constructed and limited. A cube is a collection of cards, several hundred, which you will then draft or play sealed deck with out of packs you form from your cube. Designing and collecting and putting together your cube is a lot like building a deck, only on a much grander scale. In fact, it's really designing a format, which is something that only Magic designers at Wizards of the Coast usually get to do. And it's something that has a huge appeal for people who get really into the Magic hobby. It's also great because you get to play limited, sealed deck or draft with your cube as many times as you want without having to buy new packs all of the time. And if there are overpowered or underpowered cards in the format that you just don't like, you can take them out of your cube and then just replace them. Now, cube is a casual format and there are very few clear-cut, definite rules you have to follow. But this video is going to contain a whole host of suggestions for ways you might work on, build, improve, play, and enjoy a cube. Let's start off talking about the size of your cube. You're probably going to want to start off with 360 cards. That's going to allow you to draft with 8 players, and you will use up the entire cube in an 8-man draft. Now, you don't have to have that many, especially if you're starting small or you have a smaller play group. You can start smaller and you can just play with less players, that's fine. But generally speaking, most people aim for at least 360. You're also going to want some basic lands. Now, I've got my cube right here, and I have actually gone as far as sleeving up a bunch of basic lands in the same sleeves as my cube, and they're all at one side so that no one has to sleeve lands or has to unsleeve my cards in order to play. Not everybody does that. I have found it a little bit easier, but it's down to your personal preference. If you're looking to scale things up, you can look to grow from 360 up to 720. And when you hit that point, you can either run 2 8-man drafts simultaneously if you're in a big gaming group and a lot of people want to play with your cube, or it puts you in a position where only half the cards are going to get used in any individual draft. And there's certain advantages to that because you're going to get more variance every time you play. And that's going to depend a bit on whether you want a more focused experience where everyone can do the same things every time. But generally, I find I prefer a bit of variety, and I try to keep mine on the slightly larger side. Now let's talk about the scope of your cube, or limiting it down a little bit to what you want to focus on. Some people like to do best cards of all time cube, although if you're not going to proxy a whole bunch of cards, that's going to get very expensive, especially if you're looking to get Power 9 and so on in there. But there is a certain appeal to playing with the most outrageously broken, unfair cards of all times, and some of these cubes lead themselves to turn 2 and turn 3 kills and the most obscure, obscene things happening, which is really a nice break from regular Magic, although perhaps not something you'd want to play every single night. Pauper Cube is also interesting. You can look for the most interactive or powerful budget cards of all time, and then put together a really interesting array of cards without expending too much. You can also go for maybe a tribal theme, or maybe even revisit something that Wizards have done in one or more blocks. In my own cube, I have picked powerful limited cards from 1996 to 2006 or so on, which is the era I was playing competitively, and it's cards I remember fondly drafting and building and sealed from that era. And I've put a couple of sub-themes into my cube. I was particularly fond of the original Invasion set and its color matters theme, the idea that manipulating the colors of cards can be a powerful effect. So I've got Tidal Visionary in there. He's one of my favorite creatures of all time. He taps to change the color of a creature. There's Sway of Illusion, an instant that changes the color of any number of creatures. And then there's a bunch of creatures that care about other cards that care about other creatures' colors. So there are some creatures with various protection abilities. I've got some of the Weavers from Invasion, which will affect cards of allied colors. The Skyweaver can give a blue or black creature flying. I've got Removal that will kill target non-black creature. So you can either enable or disable that with a color shift. And there are a lot of weak cards around that I've avoided, like the original Sleight of Mind and the color laces. So I haven't included those, but I found the ones that work and do something in a game, and I put them in so people that play with my cube get to experience some of my favorite things about Magic. Like I said, you could also build around tribes, and there's a tribal sub-theme in my cube. I've got some of the rebels, not Lin Civi, but some of the more fun rebels without getting out of hand. I've got some elves in there and some elves that benefit from having multiple elves on the table. And that could be an entire theme for your cube. Tribe matters. You could also build around a certain plane. Innistrad is very popular. And Ravnica, latest at time of recording, and that's been revisited 3 times now, and there's a whole load of thematic stuff you can put together and cards that will naturally interact with each other because those blocks are often revisited around similar themes. By targeting specific themes, specific mechanics, or specific sets, you can kind of lean on the design work Wizards have already done because they build their sets to work interactively with other cards within the same set. You can also make other design decisions, like for example, whether to keep it singleton, to only run one of every card. That's fairly normal because people like a lot of variety in their sets, although I've got 4 copies of Avarax in mine because I really like this guy and the way he fetches other copies of himself. And there are a few other cards like that you can either make an exception for, or you can even disregard single altogether if that's your preference. You might also want to think about archetypes in your cube. What kind of decks do you want to allow people or enable people to build? One very popular mechanic that people sometimes put a lot of cards in their cubes for is Reanimator, because people love bringing back huge creatures from the graveyard. But if you want that sort of thing to happen in your cube, you have to plan ahead and allow it. If you don't get Animate Dead, Necromancy, even some of the very powerful cards like Recurring Nightmare or Survival of the Fittest, and other ways to fill up your graveyard, then people simply aren't going to be able to do that sort of thing. It's really down on you as the cube designer to set people up to do the cool stuff and set yourself up to do the cool stuff that you and the other players are going to enjoy. Typically, you'll want to support all of the color combinations. You can decide whether to put in certain kinds of multi-lands, whether to enable allied color combinations, opposed color combinations, or whether to push both or neither. It's worth bearing in mind if you give too many mana enablers, people will be able to build all kinds of 5-color decks and disregard color concerns altogether. Maybe that's something you want, maybe it isn't. As always with Cube, it's down to you to design the format that you want. You can also look at the keywords in various sets to help you find a direction. That's not to say that you have to build around keywords, but for example, in Guilds of Ravnica, your Surveil mechanic interacts very well with both Jumpstart and Undergrowth. Also, the Mentor mechanic works very well with the token generation in green-white, and it's ways like this that Wizards are giving you opportunities to find things to build around, not only when you're building a deck, but when you're assembling a format like a cube. Now let's talk about picking the cards for your cube. One concept from Wizards game design that I'm really fond of is signpost cards. The idea that they will get these iconic cards that kind of signal to the players as soon as they see them what a particular color combination or what a particular set of cards are going to be about. For example, you might have a splashy green-blue rare that draws cards to let everyone know that green and blue in this set is very apt at card draw. And once they see a card like that, that'll indicate to them, even looking at their first pack, the sort of things they might be able to expect from green-blue if they continue to draft that combination. You can also do this with a set of cards, like for example, a tribe. For elves, for example, if I were to open my first pack in a cube draft and see a well-wisher in the pack, that's an elf that taps to gain me 1 life for every other elf in play. Having seen that card, I might then expect there will be a range of other cards, for example, Wirewood Channeler, that care about how many elves are in play, and that's a signal to me that drafting a lot of elves might pay dividends later in the draft. It's worth thinking about making sure you don't signpost things that aren't in your cube. For example, Slimefoot the Stowaway is a card that works around creating saprolings and triggers on saprolings dying. If you don't have any other saproling cards in your deck, whilst it's an okay standalone card, it does send a bit of a strange signal to your players. If I were going to have no other saprolings in my deck, then I might instead go with something like Poison Tip Archer, which has got a similar trigger. Whenever a creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life, but it's not indicating something that they're not going to find elsewhere within the cube. Think about the messages that some of the cards you're putting into your cube are going to send to the players when they start to look at them. You're also going to want to think how many cards of each color or type you're going to want to put into your cube. For example, one simple way to start would be to have 60 cards of each color, and then 30 colorless and 30 non-basic lands. But also think about the spread of mana costs within those colors. If all your red cards cost 5 and 6, it's going to be quite difficult to build a red deck. If you wanted to start making things a bit more fancy, you could maybe go with 50 of each color, 50 multicolored cards spread out amongst the different color combinations, and then again 30 artifacts or colorless and 30 non-basic. And these are just guidelines. Do what you want, but bear in mind that if people see cards of a particular color, they're going to be able to expect to draft a fair amount of cards of that color, and they're going to want a decent mana spread within that color as well. It's totally fine to include bombs and splashy cards within your cube. For example, I've even got Balance in my cube, which is a little bit out of theme and one of the most powerful cards of all time. But I found that because many of the cards that combine with it to make it really silly aren't in my cube, then whilst it's still very good, it's not as utterly game-breaking as it would be in a constructed format. Conversely, I took out Upheaval, which had a tendency to win any game anyone played it in. Upheaval returns all permanents to their owner's hand, and someone would simply tap 8 mana, cast Upheaval, make another land, tap that, make a 3-mana creature, and they're starting a new game with a land, a creature in play, and 7 cards in hand, versus their opponents who's about to discard a bunch of things and try and play catch up on only 1 mana. That 3-drop generally just beats them to death and makes the game no fun at all. So think about bombs that fit into the archetypes that you want to push, but also think about cards that work in multiple different archetypes as well, so that when players are choosing cards, there'll be a little bit of competition over which ones that they want. One of the most intriguing and attractive elements of cube is that your cube is never really finished. Even people that have had cubes for years, I've got friends back in the UK that are still swapping out cards from cubes that they were building when I left 5 years ago. Look at what the players do when they interact with your cube. They may lean very heavily towards one color, and if everyone's fighting for red or for black, it might indicate that those colors are much stronger or much more appealing, and you might want to swap out some of the less exciting cards in other colors so that people maybe open a white bomb and go, oh my god, I'm going to build my deck around this now. You also want to watch out for truly broken cards that make games not fun. Like I said, I have surprisingly, personally, found Balance to be not that bad in a cube that's got a lot of 3 casting cost creatures and not a lot of broken nonsense going on. Conversely, Upheaval and Umezawa's Jitte, very broken limited cards in their own day, turned out to be very unfair, and games just ending out of nowhere with the opponent not having much they can do about that unless they happen to be playing blue and have a counterspell open. Ultimately, you want everyone to have fun and everyone to be keen to play more. Your players will also have a lot of suggestions about what they want to do. Absolutely listen to all of the problems and the issues they raise. Think twice about their suggestions for improving it. Ultimately, you're going to know your own cube best, and you might listen to their problem, but have a different take on how you want to try and address that problem. Whether you want to go with what they say, or what you think is best, or try a bit of both. Ultimately, it's always down to you. One thing that's harder to spot is the cards that never see play. So you might want to flick through people's sideboards and their unused cards at the end of games and ask them cards that they just thought they would never end up putting into their deck, because those are prime candidates to swap out for cards that are going to get more play and be a bit more exciting and make people choose between which of these 2 great options that they want. Maybe those cards are just a bit weak for the power level of your cube, or maybe there's not enough that interacts with them. There's no point having a Narc Amoeba in your cube if there's not a lot of bunch of stuff that benefits from milling yourself. With the problems and weaker cards identified, start swapping them out, or perhaps building up support for the underplayed cards that you want to see more of. That way your cube is going to grow and expand, and you'll have ever more fun in the continuing work of tuning it for the kind of experience that you want. And remember, you can always add more cards, although I find I like to keep mine in a box about this size because then it's easily transported. Thanks for joining me talking all about cubes here at Nights at the Game Table. If you've enjoyed this video, you can like us on Facebook or subscribe on YouTube to get even more of this kind of content. We'll be seeing you again very soon.